You want answers?
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
You want answers?
You have offended my family.
I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth.
And you have offended the Shaolin Temple.
You can't handle the truth.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical Rant.
With Washington State's I-502 legalization came a 5 nanogram per milliliter limit on active THC in the blood. This is now per se evidence to convict you on a DUI charge. In Colorado, the governor is poised to sign a bill that creates a 5 nanogram per milliliter limit that has failed to pass in 6 previous attempts. This would set a permissible inference of guilt on a DUI charge. To my fellow supporters of marijuana legalization, I'm reminded of the saying, be careful what you wish for because you just might get it. Now, before I explain that, let's make sure everyone's familiar on the basic concepts. These limits in Colorado and Washington refer to the active THC in blood, not the inactive metabolites you get busted on for a workplace pee test, sometimes days or weeks after you've used cannabis. A per se limit means that you're automatically guilty and you have no defense. You could be driving absolutely perfectly and you'll still be guilty of a DUI if your blood's over 5 nanograms per milliliter. A permissible inference means that you're presumed to be guilty, but you can defend yourself if you can prove you weren't driving impaired, even if your blood's over 5 nanograms per milliliter. All right, now let's get back to the wishes. For years now, we have been lobbying for marijuana legalization with frames like treat marijuana like alcohol and tax and regulate marijuana like alcohol and marijuana is safer than alcohol. It's not a bad strategy, obviously, because it brought us 2 legalized marijuana states. But setting marijuana in a frame alongside alcohol has molded the public's understanding of those drugs to think of them similarly. So now they want to know, where's the marijuana breathalyzer? What's the magic number that tells us when someone's too stoned to drive, like the magic .08 BAC number that enables us to nab drunk drivers? Now, it's this point where one of us pipes up and goes, impairment! Impairment! The marijuana limits don't test for impairment. Many people, like medical marijuana patients, can be above 5 nanograms per milliliter and be completely unimpaired. We need to test for impairment. Yep, absolutely. And this is a case where being right is not going to win the argument. See, part of the problem is that we're kind of seen as being hypocritical. If we really believe that blood chemistry doesn't determine impairment, why aren't we rallying to repeal alcohol per se limits? Now, I know there is quite a difference between alcohol and marijuana in the blood, and there is a much more reliable dose-dependent relationship between alcohol impairment than THC and impairment. However, I know plenty of people who drink regularly who can drive in a satisfactory manner at .08 BAC. So we end up saying that people who use pot all the time can develop a tolerance and drive fine over the limit, but alcoholics can't? But the majority of the problem, the biggest piece of the problem here, is a critical misunderstanding of what DUI means to the public. The DUI doesn't stand for driving under impairment. It stands for driving under the influence. In our society, we're not punishing people based on their impairment. We're punishing them based on their irresponsibility. Imagine this. Let's take 3 drivers. We'll take Danica Patrick, me, and a random elderly grandmother. And let's test all our driving ability while we're sober. And let's do it on a letter grade system, okay? And under these tests, let's suppose that Danica Patrick gets an A+, and I get a B, and Granny, whose reflexes are slow and can barely see over the steering wheel, she gets a C-. In other words, Danica Patrick is a world-class pro driver, I'm a decent driver, and Granny barely passes. Okay, next we get Danica drunk. Yeah. And then I smoke a joint. Now, Danica, she's at .08 BAC, and my THC, let's say it's at 35 nanograms per milliliter, and Granny's still sober. We all get in the simulator again. We all go out on the road test again. Danica drives again. She tests out at a C. I test out and get about a C+. And Granny, sober, she gets a C- still. But despite the fact that both me and Danica are driving better than Granny, even when we're buzzed, Danica and I are going to get DUIs. Legally, because we're under the influence, but culturally, because we chose to drive irresponsibly after reducing our ability to drive as safe as possible. That's what the public supports when they're punishing people at 0.08. And that's why they want a magic number for THC. Granny, despite her inability to merge on the freeway, her forever left turn blinker, and her tendency to drive 20 miles an hour too slow, is still driving to the best of her ability and not irresponsibly choosing to reduce that ability. Now, at this point in the argument, this is the part where another one of us pipes up and with a whole bunch of studies and a whole bunch of anecdotes. William Breathes tested it in 15 nanograms after a night's sleep. Or Cairo in Washington filmed all-day Addy driving just fine at 7 times the limit. And pot smokers tend to adjust their driving and drive slower and put more distance between cars. And all the public can hear when you say that is, we should be able to smoke pot and then get behind the wheel. And we're not going to win that argument. As each state ponders marijuana legalization, you can bet the stone driver issue is going to be at the forefront. If we're going to successfully deal with this issue and avoid Washington and Colorado's 5 nanograms per milliliter becoming the standard, we need to adjust our tactics. Every indication shows that the trend will be toward more scientific testing of drivers, with saliva swabs and drug breathalyzers already developed and being tested in Europe. So here's some angles I would suggest. Number 1, accept that there will be a limit and work to make it reasonable. Look, the public doesn't fear a little intoxication on the road. We got a 0.08 blood alcohol limit. That leaves plenty of room for someone to have a margarita with dinner or a beer at the game and still be okay to drive home. So what we need to do is we need to emphasize that the 5 nanogram limit is just way too low. I mean, that'd be like setting a BAC down to 0.02, which is actually the limit in some European countries, by the way. People really just want to catch the irresponsible user who just consumed pot or is consuming pot while they're driving and is too messed up to drive. That's who they want to get. So what we got to do is show them that THC in your blood spikes over 100 within the first inhale. Within the first 5 minutes or so, you're way over 100. And then find the limit that nobody could possibly be unless they had immediately smoked. I don't know what that is. We have to do some science to find out. Maybe 35, 50. But find a limit where there's no reasonable argument to say, yeah, I smoke pot all the time, and when I wake up in the morning, my levels are that high. William Breathes wakes up at 15. All right, set the limit at 20. Let's find a limit. Let's find a number that's high enough that people who are being responsible will automatically, almost always fall under that limit, and then allow them the illusion of security that they're going to catch the ones that are really stoned. Number 2, make this a permissible inference, like what they just did in Colorado, that gives the marijuana user a chance to prove his or her driving wasn't impaired. You combine that with a reasonable high limit, and that should give everybody except the actually too stoned to drive driver a fair day in court. Like all day Addy, right? All day Addy got busted. She was driving 7 times the limit. She was at 35, 36 nanograms. But based on the evidence, she would have a very strong case against permissible inference to say that she wasn't impaired. And third, give a little to get a little. This is one of the things that frustrates me about the marijuana movement sometimes, is the idealism of activists versus the realism of politics. Politics is the art of the possible. It's the art of the deal. It's you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. It's democracy, and it's the worst form of government except all the other forms of government that we've tried. Okay, so this is the way things work. And sometimes in the democracy, sometimes when you're trying to fight for something, you got to give a little to get a little. You got to find a compromise. You got to find something that will address the fears of the public, but still reflect the rights and privileges of, average citizens who want to drive. So here's my idea on that. What people fear is blazing up and driving, whether you're smoking the joint while you're driving or pulling massive bong rips and then getting behind the wheel. That's the image in people's mind, the hot boxed car going down the freeway. That's what people are really afraid of. So let's take advantage of this existing treat marijuana like alcohol corner that we've kind of painted ourselves into. And let's use that frame to offer the public the marijuana equivalent of the open container. Any usable marijuana in an unlocked container or used paraphernalia or smoldering joints within the driving compartment would be treated like an open container of alcohol. I think if you offered this kind of compromise as you're negotiating for the higher limit and the permissible inference, I think this would go a long way to getting us a reasonable limit that we can have a court defense against. Now, I know these suggestions will be controversial. Some people are going to suggest that, well, look, we've had DUI laws against toking and driving in all 50 states forever, and they require that the police prove impairment. Yes, I know, but understand that the public doesn't see it as the police proving impairment. They see it as the police getting stoners off the road. And when the public's perceptions and the lawmakers' perceptions, the way they see it now is how we keep stoners off the road is that when we pull them over and smell weed, we can arrest them for having weed. That's the perception they have right now. Now that we propose taking that option away from the police, the public feels like there's going to be no way to keep the stoners off the road. Now, as illogical as that is, to the public's mind, legalization introduces a brand new drug to society, and we're seen as opposing for marijuana the same policies that keep the drunk drivers in check. This is the political reality of the situation. Now, look, if you can get marijuana legalization passed in your state without any sort of THC and blood limit, more power to you. But I believe the political realities are going to make that nigh impossible. Now, Colorado did it. Colorado passed legalization with no DUI in that at all, only to see its legislature hammer away at 5 nanograms until now it looks like it's about to become law. If the choice is legalization that will pass with limits or continuing to arrest and imprison marijuana smokers, the smart thing to do would be to lobby for fairer limits. Understand that, just like the Stones said, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need. I feel that too much opposition to any sort of limit whatsoever flies in the face of existing precedent with respect to alcohol and puts us in the dangerous position of appearing to not care about public safety as we legalize marijuana. Show that we have a better answer and a more fair answer in a higher limit and a permissible inference than trying to oppose it altogether and appearing to not care about public safety. There we go. So we're going to take that into hour 2. If you got any questions or comments about that, we'll take your calls right here at 971-533-7111. For Brian the Red, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, take care of each other, tokers.